At my son's Yale graduation, he stood on that stage as valedictorian, projected his fancy buildings on the big screen, and told 2,000 people, "My father built houses, small houses, ordinary houses. He taught me what I did not want to become." He got a laugh. I sat there with my arthritic hands folded on my lap, hands that mixed every batch of mortar that built his life. So I stood up, walked out, and made one phone call. 6 months later, when his architecture license was revoked and his world collapsed, he came looking for the $170,000 trust fund I had saved my entire life for him. It was already gone. I appreciate you being here. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from right now. Leave a comment with your location, so I know you are still with me, because what you are about to hear is not just about a graduation speech. It is about loyalty, silence, and the moment a father finally stops being invisible. And one quick note before we continue. Some details in this story have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any similarity to real people or events is coincidental, but the message and the lesson remain completely true. Let me take you back to where it started. The air inside Woolsey Hall smelled like old oak, lemon polish, and the kind of money that does not sweat. Vaulted ceilings, carved stone columns, stained glass windows, throwing colored light across rows of polished wooden pews. It looked like a cathedral, and maybe that was the point. These people worshipped something. It just was not God. I am Walter Briggs, 72 years old, master mason and general contractor, retired, out of the south side of Chicago. I have spent 50 years building things with my hands: houses, porches, retaining walls, church steps, foundations. My hands are the proof, swollen at every knuckle, twisted slightly inward from decades of gripping trowels in Chicago winters when the mortar freezes before it sets and you have to work twice as fast to keep the wall from cracking. There is a scar across my right palm from a masonry saw that kicked back in '91. I was back on the job in 3 weeks, because tuition was due. I was sitting in the second to last row. When I walked in, an usher in a navy blazer looked at my charcoal gray suit, the one I bought off a clearance rack at a JCPenney in Cicero 8 years ago, and directed me toward the back. He said the front rows were reserved, but I know the look. I have been getting it my whole life. It is the look people give a brick wall. They know it holds the building up, but they do not want it in the living room. I twisted the gold wedding band on my left ring finger. Dorothy, my wife, gone 20 years now, lung disease. The doctors called it idiopathic, meaning they did not know what caused it. But I knew. 20 years of helping me sand drywall and mix morite in unventilated basements. 20 years of breathing in the dust that built our life. She never complained. She just coughed a little more each year until the coughing was all she did. The last night, in the hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and wilting carnations, she grabbed my hand. Her fingers were so thin, I could feel every bone, like holding a small bird. "Build him something I cannot, Walter," she whispered. "Build him a future." And I did. $280,000. That is what it cost to get Marcus Briggs from the south side of Chicago to the stage of Yale University. I did not take out a single loan. I paid every cent out of my pocket. I sold the lot on 51st Street, the one Dorothy and I bought in 1978, the one where she planted her first rose bush the day we signed the deed. I worked double shifts. I took side jobs on weekends, repointing chimneys and patching foundations for old ladies who paid me in cash and cookies. I drove my 2008 Ford F-250, white, 340,000 miles, rusted toolbox welded to the bed, until the transmission whined like a dying animal because a new truck meant one less semester paid for. And then there was the trust fund. $170,000. Separate from tuition. That was the money from selling the lot plus 40 years of putting 10% of every paycheck into a savings account that earned almost nothing but felt like everything. It was supposed to be his seed money, his down payment on a house, his safety net. I had imagined handing it to him 1,000 times. I would shake his hand, maybe at this very graduation, and say, "Go build something real, son." But right now, none of that mattered. Because Marcus was walking across that stage, and I was the proudest man in the building. He looked sharp. Cap and gown pressed perfectly, the blue and white honors sash draped across his chest. He moved with a confidence I never had, a smoothness that came from years of being told he was exceptional. And he was. Valedictorian, my son. The boy who used to sit on an overturned bucket in the backyard and watch me lay brick, who used to hand me tools before he even knew their names, was about to address 2,000 people at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I leaned forward. My knees ached. My back was stiff from the 12-hour drive. But I did not care. I was floating on pride. Pure, undiluted pride. The kind that makes your chest feel too small for your heart. Marcus reached the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He smiled out at the audience, that wide, easy smile that reminded me so much of Dorothy, it made my breath catch. Behind him, a large screen flickered to life. The first image appeared, a skyscraper, glass and steel, twisting toward the sky like a frozen tornado. Beautiful, cold, the kind of building I would never be hired to touch. He leaned into the microphone. His voice was smooth, polished, completely scrubbed of the South Side. "Let me tell you," he said, "about the people who built me." I sat up straighter. I smoothed my tie. I was ready. Marcus clicked a small remote in his hand, and the slide changed. A sweeping render of a glass museum appeared, all curves and cantilevers. The kind of building that looks like it is defying gravity just to prove it can. The audience murmured in appreciation. "Architecture," Marcus said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who has rehearsed in front of a mirror, "is not about function. It is about aspiration. It is about looking at a skyline and asking, what if?" He clicked again. Another building. A residential tower with a facade that rippled like water frozen in mid-wave. Then another. A cultural center with walls of perforated steel that cast patterned shadows on the ground like lace. Each image drew a small gasp from the crowd. Marcus was performing, and he was good at it. His timing was precise, his gestures measured. He knew when to pause, when to lower his voice, when to look up from his notes and make eye contact with the third row like he was sharing a secret. I did not recognize my son. Not the boy, anyway. The man on that stage had been assembled by someone else. The accent was gone. The posture was different. Even the way he held his hands, open-palmed and expressive, like a conductor, was foreign to me. Marcus used to shove his hands in his pockets when he was nervous. He used to rock on his heels. Now he stood perfectly still, perfectly composed, perfectly manufactured. None of this would have been possible, Marcus continued, shifting his weight, without the people who shaped my vision. Here it comes, I thought. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs. First, Marcus said, I want to acknowledge a man who changed the trajectory of my life. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I took a breath. Professor Nathaniel Cross. The name landed in my chest like a cold stone. I watched a man in the second row rise from his seat. He stood slowly, deliberately, the way a man stands when he knows cameras are watching. Professor Nathaniel Cross. Tall, silver-haired, tanned in that even, expensive way that comes from vacations, not labor. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck, cut so precisely it looked painted on. His smile was wide, white, and perfectly practiced. He raised one hand in a modest wave, as if he were reluctant to accept the attention, but his eyes told a different story. They were drinking it in. I had met Cross once, briefly, 2 years ago, at a parents' weekend event. He shook my hand and immediately looked past me, scanning the room for someone more interesting. His handshake was soft. I remember thinking, this man has never mixed a batch of anything in his life. His palms were smooth as a church pew. He smelled like cologne and ambition. Professor Cross, Marcus said, turning to face him with what looked like genuine reverence. You did not just teach me architecture. You taught me how to see. You showed me that architecture is not about shelter. It is about making a statement. It is about legacy. You gave me vision when all I had was sight. The hall erupted in applause. Cross nodded slowly, pressing a hand to his chest in a gesture of humility so rehearsed it looked choreographed. He sat back down, crossing one leg over the other, adjusting his cufflinks. The woman next to him, probably his wife, squeezed his arm and beamed. I watched him settle back into his seat, with the satisfied ease of a man who believes his own mythology. Something prickled at the base of my skull, a feeling I could not name yet but recognized from 40 years of reading walls. When you tap a wall with your knuckle, a solid wall gives you a flat, dense thud. A hollow wall gives you a thin, resonant echo. Cross sounded hollow. I could not explain it then. I just felt it. Like a frequency only old dogs and old masons can hear. Marcus went on. He thanked 3 more professors by name, citing specific courses and ideas that shaped his thinking. He thanked his roommate, a kid named Tristan, for pushing him during all-night studio sessions. He thanked the dean for creating an environment of excellence. He thanked a design firm in Manhattan for an internship that opened doors. Each name was a small cut, not because they did not deserve thanks, but because each one pushed the moment further away. The moment when he would say my name. I kept waiting. I kept telling myself it was coming. He is saving the best for last. I thought, that is what you do. You build up to the foundation. The foundation is always last, because it is the most important. Marcus paused. He looked down at his notes. He took a slow breath. When he looked up again, his eyes swept across the hall, moving past the VIP rows, past the faculty section, all the way to the back. To me, our eyes met. For one brief second, I saw something flicker across his face. It might have been guilt. It might have been pity. It might have been the faint discomfort of a man about to do something he knows is wrong, but has decided to do anyway. He looked away. And my father, he said. I sat up straighter. My arthritic fingers gripped my knees. My throat tightened. Here it is, I told myself. Here it comes. But something was wrong. His voice had shifted. It dropped half a register. Not deeper with emotion, but quieter, softer. The way people lower their voice when they are about to deliver bad news in a hospital waiting room. The way you speak to someone you feel sorry for. He was not about to thank me. He was about to explain me. My father, Marcus said. And the screen behind him changed one last time. No skyscraper this time. No glass museum or rippling tower. It was a photograph. A simple photograph of a row of brick houses on a narrow Chicago street. The kind of houses I built. 2 stories. Flat roofs, narrow porches with iron railings. Solid. Practical. The kind of buildings that keep the rain out and the heat in and never make it into any magazine. I recognized the street. It was 51st. Our street. Dorothy's roses would have been in the front yard of the 3rd house from the left, except the photo was taken in winter and the bushes were bare. Marcus gestured at the screen with an open palm. My father built houses, he said. His tone was gentle, the way you talk about a family pet that passed away. Fond, but distant. Small houses, ordinary houses. He paused. The silence was a held breath. He taught me what I did not want to become. The laugh came from somewhere in the middle rows. It was not loud. It was not cruel, exactly. It was the polite, knowing chuckle of people who understand the joke because they have all made the same escape. They had all left something small behind to become something big. Marcus had just said out loud what they whispered at cocktail parties. And they loved him for it. More laughter rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. A few people clapped. In the second row, Professor Cross smiled and nodded slowly. The way a sculptor admires his finished work. The sound hit me like a wall collapse. Not the laughter itself. I have been laughed at before. When you show up to a job site in work boots while the architects arrive in loafers, you get used to being the punchline. It was the fact that my son threw the first stone. He loaded the sling. He aimed it. He let it fly in front of 2,000 people, and he smiled while the rock was still in the air. I sat perfectly still. The world went quiet, like the moment after a blast when the dust has not settled yet, and you do not know if the structure is going to hold or come down on your head. My ears were ringing. My hands, those ugly, swollen, busted-up hands that had mixed every batch of mortar that built his life, were gripping my kneecaps so hard I could feel the bones underneath. I looked down at them. The scar on my right palm. The calluses across the base of my fingers that had never softened, no matter how much lotion Dorothy used to rub into them at night. The wedding band, thin as a wire, catching the colored light from the stained glass. These hands built 212 houses. These hands carried his mother's coffin. These hands wrote every tuition check. And my son just told the world they were something to escape from. I waited. Some stupid, stubborn part of me waited for the turn, for the but, for the pivot, where he would say, "But my father also taught me that hard work is the foundation of everything." I waited for the word foundation. He was an architect. He should have known that word. He should have known what it means. The but never came. Marcus had already moved on. He was quoting some famous architect I had never heard of. Something about design being the first signal of human intention. His voice was smooth again, back on script, back in the world of glass and steel where brick and mortar were just materials you hired other people to deal with. 10 seconds. That is how long I sat there after the laugh. 10 seconds of absolute stillness, while something ancient and heavy inside my chest shifted, like a load-bearing wall being removed from a structure. You do not hear the crack right away. The building stands for a moment, confused, still holding its shape out of habit. Then gravity finds the weakness, and everything comes down. I did not come down. I stood up. The metal folding chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like a nail being pulled from old lumber. It cut through the hall, sharp and rude and real. Heads turned. A woman in the row ahead of me flinched and looked over her shoulder with the irritated expression of someone whose meditation has been interrupted. I did not say, "Excuse me." I stepped into the center aisle. I am not a small man, 72 years old, but still broad across the shoulders from half a century of lifting block and swinging sledgehammers. I blocked the view for the people behind me, and I did not care. My boots. I was wearing my work boots because they were the only shoes that did not make my feet ache after 12 hours of driving. They were Red Wings, old and scuffed. The leather cracked along the toe caps. They made a sound on that polished hardwood floor that dress shoes do not make. A heavy, deliberate, working sound. Thud, thud, thud. Each step was a sentence. Each step said, "I am leaving." Each step said, "I built this, and you broke it." Each step said, "My part is done." On stage, Marcus stopped talking. I heard the silence hit the microphone like feedback. I did not look back, but I knew he was watching me. I could feel his eyes on the back of my neck, the same way you feel a crack forming in a wall you just poured. You do not see it yet, but you know it is there. I reached the back of the hall. An usher, a young kid in a blazer, stepped forward with his hands raised slightly. The universal gesture of "Please do not cause a scene." "Sir," he whispered, "the ceremony is not over." I looked at him. He was maybe 22, Marcus's age. Clean hands. Soft jaw. the kind of kid who had never held a trowel in his life. "My part is done, son," I said. I did not whisper. The back 5 rows heard me clearly. "The bill is paid." I pushed open the heavy emergency exit door. The metal bar clanged against the frame, a sound that rang through the hall like a church bell at a funeral. Sunlight poured in, blinding and hot, flooding the dim cathedral with the raw, unfiltered light of the real world. I stepped through. The door swung shut behind me with a deep, final boom that I felt in my sternum. I stood in the parking lot. The asphalt was radiating heat. My truck sat in the back row, white and rusted and real, waiting for me like an old dog. I loosened my tie. I took a breath. The air outside did not smell like lemon polish and old money. It smelled like hot pavement and cut grass and diesel exhaust. It smelled like my life. It was done. But they did not know yet just how done it really was. The asphalt was cooking under the June sun, heat rising in visible waves that made the parked cars shimmer like a mirage. I was halfway to my truck when I heard the doors bang open behind me. "Dad?" The voice was sharp. Not sad. Not apologetic. Annoyed. "Dad. Stop. What are you doing?" I kept walking. My boots crunched on the loose gravel. I could hear him jogging behind me, his dress shoes slapping the pavement in that light, hurried way that leather soles sound when they were not designed for running. Marcus caught up at the truck. The cap was gone, but the gown was still on, billowing behind him. Up close, without the stage lights and the 2,000 admirers, he looked younger. But his eyes were different. They were Cross's eyes now, calculating, deciding how to manage the situation. "You could not just sit there?" he said, his voice low and tight. "You had to cause a scene in front of everyone. Professor Cross saw you walk out. The dean saw it. Do you understand what you just did to me?" I unlocked the truck door. The hinges groaned. I turned and looked at my son, standing there in his graduation gown, sweating through his collar. And all he could think about was what it looked like. Not what he said. Not the words that came out of his own mouth. Just the optics. $280,000, Marcus, I said. That is what I did to you. I drove a truck with 340,000 miles on it, so you could sit in the front row. I ate rice and beans 5 nights a week, so you could have a meal plan. I sold your mother's land, the land she planted her roses on, so you could hold that diploma. And you stood up there and told 2,000 strangers that I taught you what you did not want to become. Marcus's jaw tightened. He did not flinch. That was the worst part. He did not look ashamed. He looked inconvenienced, like a contractor who finds a code violation right before final inspection. A problem to be managed, not felt. That was your obligation, he said quietly. That is what fathers do. They provide. But Professor Cross gave me a future you could never understand. He opened doors you did not even know existed. The words landed clean and surgical, like a chisel splitting stone along its grain. He believed it. He truly believed that the man who taught him to talk was more valuable than the man who taught him to stand. I climbed into the cab. It smelled like sun-baked vinyl and old work gloves. It smelled like home. Enjoy your doors, Marcus, I said. I pulled the door shut and turned the key. The engine rattled to life, loud and rough. I pulled out of the lot without looking back. In the side mirror, Marcus stood alone in his graduation gown, getting smaller with every second, until he was just a dark blue shape wavering in the heat. Interstate 80 west. Then 90. 12 hours. I did not plan to stop. I rolled the window down, because the air conditioning had quit 2 summers ago. The wind blew in warm and loud, and I let it fill the silence. I kept the radio off. I wanted the road and the engine and the white dashes ticking past like a metronome. The first 3 hours I did not think at all. I watched Pennsylvania roll past. Green hills, gray overpasses, trucks hauling lumber and steel. My people, the movers of material, the invisible ones. Somewhere around Clearfield, Dorothy came back. Not as a memory, as a presence. Like she was sitting in the passenger seat with her window down, her hair blowing. The way she used to ride with me when we were young and drove out to look at lots we could not afford. She used to point at houses and say, "That one. Build me that one, Walter." And I would say, "Give me a year." And she would laugh and say, "I will give you 50. She only got 32. I remembered the day we bought the lot on 51st Street. 1978. Nothing but weeds and broken glass and a chain-link fence with a hole in it. But Dorothy walked to the center of that empty lot, knelt down in the dirt in her Sunday dress, and pushed a small rose bush into the ground with her bare hands. No shovel, no gloves. She just dug with her fingers until the roots were deep enough to hold. "There," she said, wiping the dirt on her skirt. "Now it is ours." That lot became the house. The house became the home. The home became the place where Marcus learned to walk, where he sat on that bucket and watched me lay brick. And the rosebush became a garden. Dorothy tended it every spring until her lungs would not let her bend anymore. I sold that lot 6 years ago to pay for Marcus's junior year. The new owner bulldozed the garden the same week. I drove past once and saw the bare dirt where the roses used to be. I sat in the truck for 20 minutes and did not move. The highway hummed. Ohio, Indiana. The sky turned orange, then purple, then black. I thought about the trust fund. $170,000 sitting in a savings account with Marcus's name on it. The money from selling the lot plus 4 decades of 10% of every paycheck. It was supposed to be his foundation. The concrete slab you pour before you build the walls. Without it, everything shifts. Everything cracks. But a foundation only works if the building on top of it is honest. If the structure is crooked, if the load is fake, the foundation does not save it. It just sinks with it. I pulled into my driveway on the south side at 3 in the morning. The porch light had burned out 2 weeks ago. I did not go to bed. I walked into the kitchen, sat down at the Formica table, and opened the drawer. The trust fund certificate was in a manila folder, crisp and official. $170,000. Marcus Briggs, beneficiary. I placed it on the table. On the wall, Dorothy smiled at me from a photograph taken in 1985. She was holding a trowel, standing on the front porch the day we laid the steps. Her hands were dirty. Her smile was enormous. "I know what to do, Dot," I whispered. "I know exactly what to do." I did not sleep. I sat at that table until the first gray light crept through the kitchen window and turned Dorothy's photograph from shadow into color. Then I showered, put on a clean work shirt, and drove to Pilsen. Ray Kowalski's office was on the second floor of a brick building on 18th Street, above a panaderia that filled the stairwell with the smell of fresh conchas every morning. I had rebuilt that building after the fire of '89, replaced every joist, repointed every brick, poured a new foundation when the old one cracked from the heat. Ray moved in the following year and never left. He said he trusted the building because he trusted the man who built it. That was the nicest thing a lawyer ever said to me. I was sitting in his office at 7:15. Ray was behind his oak desk, a mug of black coffee in one hand and my trust fund documents in the other. He looked like he had been awake for a while, which was normal. Ray was 70, Polish, built like a fire plug, and had the sleeping habits of a man who had seen too much of the world to rest comfortably in it. His office smelled like old paper, lemon furniture polish, and the kind of stale coffee that has been sitting on a burner since before dawn. He put the papers down and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Tom," he said. He always called me Tom, even though nobody else did. "You drove 12 hours. You have not slept. You are running on adrenaline and wounded pride. This is not the time to make a decision that involves 6 figures. "I am not running on anything, Ray," I said. "I am sitting still for the first time in 23 years. That is the difference." Ray picked up his coffee and took a long sip. He was stalling, looking for the right angle. The way lawyers do when they know the client has already decided, and they are just trying to slow the train. The boy is 24 years old, Ray said carefully. All 24-year-olds are idiots. I was an idiot. You were definitely an idiot. He said something stupid at a graduation. That is not a reason to detonate his financial safety net. I leaned forward. The leather chair creaked under my weight. He did not say something stupid, Ray. He said something calculated. He is an architect. He designs things on purpose. Every line is intentional. That speech was not a mistake. It was a blueprint. He drew me out of his life on purpose, in front of 2,000 people. And he smiled while he did it. Ray set the coffee down. He could see it in my face. The concrete had set. There was no softening it now. What do you want to do? He asked. 2 things, I said. First, I want you to transfer the entire trust fund, every cent of the $170,000, out of Marcus Briggs's name. Today. Transfer it where? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had written it at the kitchen table at 4 in the morning, my handwriting shaky but legible. It was the account information for a non-profit I had set up 3 years ago on a whim, back when I still believed Marcus would carry the family name with pride. A small fund for trade school scholarships. I never put real money in it. Just a few hundred here and there, enough to buy a kid a set of welding gloves or a textbook. The Dorothy Briggs Foundation, I said, sliding the paper across the desk. Full scholarships for trade school students. Kids who want to learn to build things with their hands. Bricklayers, plumbers, electricians, welders. The kind of people my son told the world he did not want to become. Ray looked at the paper for a long time. Then he looked at me. He was searching for a crack, a tremor, anything that suggested I might change my mind in a week. He found nothing. He picked up his pen. There are tax implications, Tom. Forms. It is not just pushing a button. I will pay whatever the IRS wants. Just move the money. Ray uncapped the pen and began filling out the transfer authorization. The scratching of the nib on paper was the only sound in the room. It sounded like a trowel scraping mortar across brick, building something new. When the form was ready, he turned it around and pushed it across the desk. The signature line was empty. Waiting. You sign this, Tom, Ray said, one last time. And there is no undo button. That money is gone. If the boy stumbles, if his career falls apart, if he needs a safety net, there is nothing beneath him. You are removing the foundation. I picked up the pen. My hand was swollen, the knuckles thick and stiff. It hurt to grip. It always hurts. I thought about Marcus on that stage, smooth and polished, and ashamed of the hands that built him. I thought about Dorothy kneeling in the dirt on 51st Street, pushing roots into the earth with her bare fingers. In masonry, I said, we do not undo. We demolish and rebuild. I signed. Walter Briggs. The ink was black and permanent. I put the pen down and looked at Ray. Second thing. I want you to find somebody who can look into a man named Nathaniel Cross, professor of architecture at Yale. Runs a firm called Cross and Partners. Ray raised an eyebrow. Why? You just cut ties. Why do you care what some professor does? Because my son is standing inside that man's building, I said. And I have been reading load-bearing walls my entire life, Ray. That man is not carrying the weight he claims. Something is hollow. I can hear it. Ray frowned. You think he is a fraud? I think a man who has never mixed a batch of mortar in his life should not be teaching people what a foundation looks like. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. And when a hollow wall collapses, it does not care who designed it. It crushes everyone inside. Ray studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I know a guy. Former FBI. White-collar specialist. He is expensive. Pay him. Use my personal savings. I want everything. Assets, liabilities, lawsuits, licenses. Every crack in the plaster. Ray made a note on his legal pad. I turned toward the door but stopped at the window. Below, 18th Street was waking up. A woman was opening the panaderia shutters. A kid was riding a bicycle down the sidewalk. Across the street, the row of brick two-flats I had built in '92 stood in the morning light, solid and straight. Their lintels level, their mortar joints clean. "Those buildings are still standing, Ray," I said without turning around. 30 years and not a single crack. Let us see how long his castles last. I walked out into the morning. The air smelled like fresh bread and warm brick. It smelled like Pilsen. It smelled like the world I built. Behind me, in Ray's office, the signed document sat on the desk. $170,000. Redirected from a son who did not want it to strangers who would honor it. The concrete was poured. Now I just had to wait for it to set. 30 days of silence has a sound to it. It is not empty. It is heavy, like a wall that has not cured yet. Still holding moisture. Waiting for time to decide whether it will harden into something permanent or crack apart from the inside. It had been exactly 1 month since the graduation. 1 month since I had spoken a single word to my son. I sat at my Formica table, the same table where Marcus used to do his homework 20 years ago, eating a ham sandwich on white bread that cost me maybe $3 to make. There was no wine. There was no waiter. Just me. The hum of the refrigerator. And the glow of my old laptop screen. I had done something I was not proud of. I created a fake Facebook account. John Mitchell. Profile picture of a lakefront sunset I found on the internet. It felt dirty. Like peering through a keyhole you know you should not look through. But I was a father, and the instinct does not switch off just because the wiring has been cut. I needed to know if he was alive. I needed to know if the building was still standing or if the cracks had started. I clicked on Marcus's profile. It was public. Of course it was. Marcus wanted the world to see him. The feed was a gallery of success, or at least the performance of it. Every photograph was staged, filtered, angled to tell a story that had nothing to do with reality. 3 days ago, he posted a photo from a restaurant. White tablecloth, amber liquid in a crystal glass, candlelight, reflecting off polished silverware. The caption read, "Architecture is built at the table as much as it is on the site. Grateful for mentors who invest in vision." He tagged the restaurant. I looked it up. A tasting menu was $350 per person. I looked at my ham sandwich. $3. I scrolled down. There was a photograph of an office. Corner unit, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the New Haven skyline that stretched out like a postcard. A drafting table sat in the foreground with a rolled blueprint on it. The caption said, "My new studio. Grateful for Professor Cross and the team at Cross and Partners. Big things ahead." It looked impressive. To anyone scrolling past, to his old classmates, to strangers, it looked like Marcus Briggs had arrived. He was the golden boy, the valedictorian with the corner office and the $350 dinners. But I looked closer. I have spent 50 years reading rooms. When you walk into a house, I can tell you in 30 seconds whether it is built on a slab or a crawl space, whether the walls are plaster or drywall, whether the foundation has shifted by a 1/4 inch. You cannot fake structure to a man who builds it for a living. The desk was empty. No papers, no pencils, no coffee rings, no smudges. The drafting table had one rolled blueprint sitting on it like a prop. There were no reference books, no material samples, no sticky notes with measurements. The chair was pushed in perfectly, as if no one had ever sat in it. It looked like a model unit in a luxury apartment complex. Pretty, hollow, designed to sell a fantasy. I was almost certain it was a co-working space. The kind of place you can rent by the hour to impress a client or take a photograph. A stage set for a play with no second act. Then I saw the post from yesterday. A close-up of his wrist. He was wearing a watch. A tag Hoyer Carrera, or at least something that wanted to be one. The caption was short. A welcome gift from Professor Cross. He said, "A builder is only as precise as his timepiece." Grateful. I stopped chewing. I pushed my glasses up and leaned into the screen. I zoomed in until the image was pixelated and grainy. I have worked with metal my entire life. I know steel the way a jeweler knows diamonds. I know the difference between a machined edge and a stamped one, between brushed finishing and polished plating, between real weight and costume weight. The bezel was wrong. On a real tag Hoyer, the markings are laser-etched, sharp enough to catch light at precise angles. These markings were printed. The indices were slightly uneven, spaced a fraction of a millimeter off, the kind of inconsistency that mass production creates when a factory is cutting corners. The bracelet links were too shiny, too reflective, lacking the matte brush texture of surgical-grade steel. It was subtle. Most people would never notice. But I noticed. It was a fake. A high-quality replica. Probably cost a few $100s. Designed to fool people who have never held real metal in their hands. Just like Cross. I sat back in my chair and let out a short, dry laugh. It was too perfect. Cross had given my son a counterfeit watch to mark the start of his counterfeit career. Marcus was walking around with a lie strapped to his wrist, thinking it was a symbol of his arrival. He was wearing costume jewelry and calling it craftsmanship. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark, and I saw my own reflection in it. An old man with deep lines around his eyes and a jaw that had not unclenched in a month. Behind my reflection, the kitchen wall. Brick. I laid those bricks in 1982, 42 years ago. They had not shifted. They had not cracked. The mortar joints were still tight, still level, still holding. Everything in my kitchen was old. The table, the chairs, the refrigerator that hummed too loud, the linoleum floor that curled up at the edges near the sink. None of it was beautiful. None of it would make it onto anyone's social media feed. But every single thing in this room was real. The table held weight. The chairs did not wobble. The walls did not echo when you knocked. Marcus's world was the opposite. Beautiful and hollow. A showroom with no inventory. A building with no foundation. A watch with no movement. I finished my sandwich, washed the plate in warm soapy water, and dried my hands on a dish towel. My hands ached. They always ache when the weather is about to change. 50 years of gripping trowels in cold wind had turned my knuckles into barometers. Rain was coming. I looked at Dorothy's photograph on the wall. She was still smiling, still holding that trowel, still standing on the porch of the house we built together. The house that was real. The house that held. "He is wearing a fake watch, Dot," I said to the empty room. "The man he chose over me gave him a fake watch, and he thinks it is real." I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkness for a moment. Somewhere out there, Marcus was posting another photograph, building another facade, stacking another hollow brick on a wall that was already leaning. And he had no idea that the man who could read walls was watching every crack form in real time. The next morning, I told myself I would not open the laptop again. I told myself I had seen enough. But the instinct of a father is like water in a basement. You can pump it out, seal the cracks, lay down vapor barrier, and it still finds a way back in. I opened it after dinner. Marcus had posted again. This time it was not a restaurant or a watch. It was a photograph of a blueprint, spread out on that same empty drafting table, held flat by a coffee mug and a phone. The lines were crisp, the scale markers precise. It was a real architectural drawing, not a rendering. A floor plan for a large residential development. The caption read, "Designing the skyline. Big things coming. Stay tuned." I leaned in. I was not looking at the caption. I was looking at the drawing itself. In the bottom right corner, the way all blueprints are formatted, there was a title block, project name, address, firm name, date. The text was small, but I could read it if I zoomed in far enough. I zoomed. The pixels stretched and blurred, but the address was legible. 51st Street and South Marshfield Avenue. Chicago, Illinois. My blood went cold. Not hot, cold. The kind of cold that hits you when you open a wall and find black mold growing behind the drywall. Silent and patient, eating the structure from the inside out. I knew that intersection. I knew it the way I knew my own hands. 51st and Marshfield was 4 blocks from my house. It was the heart of the neighborhood I had spent my life building. I had laid the foundations for 6 houses on that stretch alone. I had repointed the chimneys, replaced the lintels, rebuilt the porches after storms. Those were working people's homes. Small, ordinary. The kind of houses my son did not want to become. The blueprint showed a luxury condominium development. 12 stories. Glass and steel. Underground parking. A rooftop terrace with a pool. The kind of building that does not belong on 51st Street the way a silk tie does not belong on a bricklayer. It would tower over the 2 flats and bungalows like a bully standing over a kid in a schoolyard. And to build it, they would have to demolish everything that was already there. I stared at the screen. My throat was tight. Marcus had signed his name to a project that would tear down the houses I built. The houses that kept families warm through Chicago winters. The houses that working people saved their whole lives to afford. My son, the architect, was helping a man I did not trust destroy the neighborhood his father built with his bare hands. I closed the laptop. I could not look at it anymore. The next day, I did what I always do when the world feels crooked. I picked up my tools and went to work. Ida Washington lived 6 houses down from me on a street I had paved with sweat. She was 79 years old, a retired Army nurse who served 2 tours in Vietnam. She had hands almost as rough as mine, scarred from decades of field surgery and triage. She lived alone in a house I had helped build in 1990. A small 2-bedroom with a screened-in porch and a backyard where she grew tomatoes and kept a bird feeder shaped like a little red barn. A storm had come through 3 days earlier. Wind had torn 2 sheets of roofing, felt off her back slope, and cracked a fascia board. Water was getting in. She called a roofing company, and they quoted her $3,200. She did not have $3,200. She had a pension check and a vegetable garden. I showed up at 7 in the morning with my ladder, my nail gun, and a roll of 30-pound felt I had left over from another job. I spent 5 hours up on that roof in the July heat, tearing out the damaged section, laying new felt, nailing down replacement shingles I had bought at the hardware store for $60. I replaced the fascia board with a piece of pressure-treated lumber I had in my truck bed. I sealed every edge, every joint, every nail head with roofing cement until the thing was watertight enough to survive a hurricane. When I climbed down, Ida was standing at the back door with a glass of lemonade and a plate of oatmeal cookies. She tried to press a check into my hand. $200. Her fingers were shaking. "No, Ida," I said. "You keep that. The materials were leftovers. You are doing me a favor by letting me use them up." It was a lie. The shingles cost me $60 and the lumber cost me $40. But some lies are mortar. They hold things together. She hugged me. She smelled like lavender and old paper and something warm that I could not name but recognized as gratitude. Real gratitude. The kind you cannot fake or filter or post on social media. She held on tight, and I felt the weight of her thanks press against my chest like a hand on a load-bearing wall, steady and sure. That roof would last 20 years. It would keep the rain off an old woman who had spent her youth keeping soldiers alive in the mud of Da Nang. It was real. It was a contribution to the world that no algorithm could measure and no caption could capture. I drove home as the sun was going down. The sky over the south side was streaked with orange and purple, the kind of sunset that makes even ugly neighborhoods look like paintings. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled. Inside, I found the envelope on the kitchen table. I had picked it up from my post office box on the way home. Thick. Heavy. No return address. Just my name typed on a white label. It was the preliminary report from the investigator Ray had hired. I stood there looking at it. It sat on the formica like an unexploded shell. If Cross was legitimate, if his firm was real, the report would be thin. A few pages, tax returns, and property records. Maybe a speeding ticket. This envelope was an inch thick. It was heavy enough to feel in one hand. Inside was the truth about the man my son worshipped. Inside were the cracks I had heard when I knocked on the wall and it echoed back hollow. I did not open it. Not yet. I wanted to hold on to the day a little longer. I wanted to keep the feeling of Ida's roof under my hands, solid and new and right. I wanted to remember the lemonade and the cookies and the hug from a woman whose gratitude was worth more than any corner office. I carried the envelope to my bedroom and placed it on the nightstand next to the alarm clock. It would be there in the morning. The truth was not going anywhere. I turned off the lamp. In the darkness, I reached for Dorothy's photograph on the nightstand. I could not see it, but I knew it was there. I touched the glass with my fingertip. "They are tearing down your roses, Dot," I whispered. "They are building condos on top of your roses." Walter sat at the kitchen table with the envelope flat in front of him. He had not opened it for 3 days. It sat next to the salt shaker and a half-empty bottle of Tabasco like it belonged there. Like it was just another piece of mail. But it was not mail. It was a preliminary investigation report on Professor Nathaniel Cross, compiled by a former FBI white-collar specialist that Ray Kowalski had hired with Walter's money. $2,000 for a man to dig through public records, court filings, corporate registrations, and financial disclosures. $2,000 to find out if Walter's gut feeling was worth anything. He poured himself a cup of black coffee. No sugar. Dorothy used to put 2 spoons of sugar in hers and stir it exactly 7 times. He counted once. She laughed and told him only a mason would count stirring. He missed that laugh. He missed it every single morning. Walter picked up the envelope and tore it open with his thumb. The paper inside was thick, printed on both sides. 31 pages, held together with a black binder clip. The cover page read, "Confidential background summary. Nathaniel Allen Cross, prepared for Raymond Kowalski, attorney at law." Walter put on his reading glasses. The ones with the cracked left arm held together with electrical tape, and he began to read. The first section was education. Cross had a Master of Architecture from Columbia University, class of 1994. That part was real. He had taught at Yale since 2003. First as adjunct, then as associate professor, then as a tenured full professor with an endowed chair funded by a private real estate group called Meridian Capital Partners. Walter underlined that name with a pencil. He did not know why yet. But the name felt heavy, like a stone with something buried underneath. The second section was professional practice. Cross had founded Cross & Partners in 2008. The firm listed an office on Chapel Street in New Haven and a satellite office on Park Avenue in Manhattan. Walter remembered the staged photo on Marcus's Facebook page, the empty desk, the rolled blueprint that looked like a prop. He kept reading. Cross & Partners had completed 11 residential projects between 2009 and 2019. 7 of those projects had liens filed against them by subcontractors who were never paid. 3 had complaints lodged with the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection. 1 project, a 40-unit condominium in Stamford, had been abandoned mid-construction after the developer declared bankruptcy. The investigator noted that Cross had withdrawn his architectural fees in full before the bankruptcy was filed. Walter set down his coffee. He read that last sentence again. Cross took his money and left the building half-finished. Walter had seen buildings like that. Hollow structures with rebar sticking out of concrete like broken bones. No roof. No windows. Just a skeleton standing in the rain, rotting from the inside. He had always wondered what kind of man could walk away from something half-built. Now he knew. The third section made Walter's hands go still. It was titled, Financial Irregularities and Regulatory Flags. Meridian Capital Partners, the same group that funded Cross's endowed chair at Yale, was under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for suspected securities fraud. The firm had raised over $12 million from private investors between 2015 and 2022, promising annual returns of 18% through a portfolio of luxury real estate developments. The investigator's note was blunt. Returns of this magnitude in residential real estate are inconsistent with market performance and suggest the possible use of new investor capital to pay existing investors. Walter did not need a finance degree to understand that sentence. It was a Ponzi scheme. New money pays old money until the new money stops coming. And there was Marcus's name. Page 19. Marcus Briggs was listed as the architect of record on 4 Meridian Capital projects filed with the City of Chicago and the City of New Haven. His signature appeared on permit applications, structural certifications, and environmental compliance forms. The investigator highlighted one project in particular, a 12-story luxury condominium at the corner of 51st Street and South Marshfield Avenue. Walter stopped breathing. That was the lot, Dorothy's lot. The one he had sold 6 years ago to pay for Marcus's junior year at Yale. The land where Dorothy planted her first rose bush in 1978. And now his own son's name was on the permit to demolish everything around it and build a glass tower for people who would never know what used to grow there. Walter turned to the last page. The investigator had attached a printout of an internal email obtained through a confidential source. It was sent from Cross to Marcus, dated 4 months before graduation. The subject line read, Chicago filing. Keep this clean. The body of the email was short. Marcus, sign the permit application for the 51st Street project. Use your residential address for correspondence, not the office. Do not discuss this project with anyone outside our group. Nathaniel. Walter read it twice. Then a third time. His son had signed a permit to build on his mother's land, using his home address to hide it, under orders from a man who made his career abandoning buildings and defrauding investors. Marcus was not just an ungrateful son. He was a willing participant. He had signed his name to a lie, and he had done it while Walter was still writing tuition checks. Walter closed the file. He placed it back in the envelope and set it on the table next to Dorothy's photograph, the one from 1985 where she held a trowel in her left hand and smiled like the whole world was a garden waiting to be planted. He looked at her face for a long time. Then he said quietly, I found the crack, and it goes all the way down to the foundation. He stood up, washed his coffee cup, dried it with a towel, and placed it upside down on the rack. Then he picked up the phone and called Ray Kowalski. It rang twice. Ray. It is Walter. I read the file. A pause on the other end. Tell your man to keep digging. I want everything. Every permit. Every signature. Every dollar that moved through that firm. And Ray, one more thing. What is it, Walter? When this building comes down, I want my son to be standing outside, not underneath. He hung up the phone and sat back down. The kitchen was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. The brick wall he had built in 1982 held steady, same as always. Walter folded his hands on the table and waited. He was a mason. He knew how to be patient. He knew that every wall, no matter how tall, no matter how expensive, came down the same way. One crack at a time. 3 months passed. Walter laid brick every day like he had for 50 years. He woke at 4:30, made black coffee, ate 2 eggs and a piece of toast, and drove his F-250 to whatever job site needed him. Most days it was small work. A retaining wall for a church on Halsted. A chimney repair for an elderly couple on Ashland. A new front stoop for a barber named Gerald, who paid half in cash and half in brisket from his brother's smokehouse. Walter did not mind. Honest work was honest work. And brisket was brisket. He did not call Marcus. Marcus did not call him. The silence between them was not the kind that heals. It was the kind that hardens. Like mortar left too long in the bucket. It sets into something you cannot reshape. Walter thought about his son every morning when he looked at Dorothy's photograph, and every night when he locked the front door. But thinking about someone and reaching out to them are two different things. And Walter had decided that the next move belonged to Marcus. Ray Kowalski called twice during those 3 months. The first call was short. The investigator had found additional Meridian Capital filings in Delaware and Nevada, shell companies layered on top of shell companies like bad plaster over rotten drywall. The money trail was getting deeper and uglier. The second call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Ray's voice was different, careful, like a man choosing where to step on a roof he does not trust. Walter, the SEC has referred the Meridian case to the FBI. They are moving to a criminal investigation. Grand jury subpoenas went out last week. Cross is on the list. And Walter, Marcus's name appeared on 3 of the subpoenaed documents. Walter was standing in Gerald's backyard, holding a level against a half-finished wall. He did not drop it. He did not curse. He pressed the level flat against the brick and watched the bubble settle dead center. The wall was plumb. The wall was true. His son's world was not. Is he going to be arrested? Walter asked. I do not know yet. He is not a primary target. But he signed those permits and certifications. If the FBI decides he knew what he was signing, they could charge him with conspiracy or fraud. It depends on what they find on Cross's computers and phones. Walter thanked Ray and hung up. He finished Gerald's wall that afternoon. He did not rush. He did not slow down. He just worked. 1 brick at a time. Same as always. The arrest came 3 weeks later on a Thursday morning in early November. Walter did not see it live. He was on a job site in Bridgeport, replacing a cracked lintel above a bakery door, when Tony Medina, his laborer, held up his phone and said, "Hey, Walter, is that not your son's professor?" Walter wiped his hands on his canvas apron and looked at the screen. A local Chicago news broadcast showed FBI agents in dark blue windbreakers walking out of a glass office building in the Loop. Nathaniel Cross was in the center of the frame, hands cuffed in front of him, wearing a charcoal suit with no tie. His silver hair was uncombed. His face was blank. Not scared. Not defiant. Just empty. Like a building after the tenants leave and before the wrecking ball arrives. The news anchor's voice was steady and professional. Federal agents today arrested Nathaniel Cross, a Yale architecture professor and principal of Cross & Partners, on 12 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, and 2 counts of securities fraud. The charges stem from an alleged scheme involving Meridian Capital Partners, a private investment firm that prosecutors say defrauded over 40 investors of approximately $12 million over a 7-year period. Walter watched the screen without blinking. Tony looked at him sideways. "You okay, boss?" "I am fine, Tony." "Hold that lintel steady." The broadcast continued. A second segment showed a construction site on the south side. Walter recognized it immediately. 51st and South Marshfield. Dorothy's Corner. The camera panned across a muddy lot surrounded by chain-link fence. A half-poured foundation sat in the middle, gray and cracked, with rebar poking out at angles like the ribs of a dead animal. Orange cones lined the sidewalk. A faded sign read Meridian Luxury Residences, designed by Cross & Partners, coming 2025. Someone had spray-painted fraud across it in red letters. The reporter stood in front of the site. This South Side development, one of 4 Meridian projects now frozen by federal order, was slated to become a 12-story luxury condominium. Residents say the project displaced 3 families and demolished 2 homes that had stood on this block for over 40 years. Walter stared at the cracked foundation on the screen. He had built foundations his entire life. He knew what a good one looked like. Straight lines, clean edges, rebar tied in a grid, spaced evenly, buried at the right depth. What he saw on that screen was none of those things. It was rushed. It was shallow. It was a foundation built by people who never intended the building to stand. They just needed it to look real long enough to collect the checks. He thought about Dorothy's rose bush, the one she planted in the spring of 1978, the year they bought that lot with their first savings. She had dug the hole herself, mixed the soil with compost from the kitchen, and pressed the roots in with both hands. She watered it every Sunday after church. That bush grew for 23 years until they sold the lot to pay for Marcus's junior year. Walter had walked past the corner one last time before the sale closed. The bush was still there, blooming red in October, stubborn and beautiful, just like her. Now that corner was a crime scene. Yellow tape and orange cones where roses used to grow. Tony set down the lintel and looked at Walter again. "Boss, seriously. You look like you just saw a ghost." Walter picked up his trowel. "Not a ghost, Tony. A demolition." He finished the lintel, cleaned his tools, loaded the truck, and drove home. The streets were dark by 5:30. November in Chicago does not wait for anyone. He parked in the driveway, walked to the kitchen, and sat down at the table. Dorothy's photograph watched him from the shelf. The investigation file sat in the drawer beneath the phone. Walter opened his flip phone and stared at Marcus's number. He had not dialed it in 3 months. His thumb hovered over the green button. He thought about calling. He thought about warning his son. He thought about saying, "Get out now, before they come for you too." But he did not press the button. He closed the phone and set it on the table. Marcus had chosen his architect. He had chosen his mentor. He had chosen the man in the charcoal suit over the man with the calloused hands. And now that man was in handcuffs on national television, and the building they designed together was a pile of cracked concrete on a dead woman's roses. Walter turned off the kitchen light. He sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the clock tick and the old radiator hiss. Then he said to nobody, "The wall is coming down, Dot. I just hope the boy gets out before it falls." He went to bed. He did not sleep well. But he woke at 4:30 the next morning, made black coffee, ate 2 eggs and toast, and drove to the next job. Because that is what builders do. They keep building, even when everything around them is falling apart. The call came on a Sunday evening, 6 days after the arrest. Walter was sitting on the front porch in a folding chair, watching the streetlights flicker on along 47th Street. November had turned mean. The wind came off the lake like it had a personal grudge, cutting through his flannel jacket and settling into his knuckles. His hands ached. They always ached now. 50 years of gripping trowels and lifting cinder blocks had turned his fingers into something that looked more like twisted rebar than human anatomy. His flip phone buzzed on the armrest. Marcus. Walter looked at the phone for 4 full rings. He counted them the way he counted courses of brick. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he opened it. "Dad." That word sounded thin, like a wire pulled too tight, about to snap. "Dad, I need help. My lawyer says the FBI wants to interview me next week. They think I knew about the money, about Meridian, about what Cross was doing. I did not know. I signed what he told me to sign. I trusted him." Walter leaned back in the chair. The metal frame groaned under his weight. He looked at the streetlight across from his house, mounted on a concrete pole he had helped pour in 1989. That pole was still standing. Still plumb. Still doing its job. "You trusted him," Walter repeated. "And what did I do, Marcus? Did I not feed you? Did I not drive you to school every morning for 12 years? Did I not sell your mother's land so you could pay for your junior year? Dad, I know what you did. Then why did you tell 2,000 people that I taught you what you did not want to become?" The question landed like a brick dropped from a scaffold. Walter heard his son swallow. "I was wrong," Marcus said. "Cross coached me on every word. He said the speech needed a contrast, a before and after. He said it was narrative structure." Walter almost laughed. "Narrative structure. A man who builds Ponzi schemes, teaching a boy how to structure a story. Every lie needs a framework, and Cross had built his out of Walter's son. Marcus, I am going to ask you one question. The permit for the 51st Street project. The 12-story condominium on your mother's old lot. Did you know that was her land? The silence was not the silence of a man thinking. It was the silence of a man caught. The breathing stopped. The background noise pulled back like a tide going out before a wave. Yes. The word came out like a nail pulled from old wood. I knew. Cross told me the lot had been sold years ago. He said it was just a parcel number. He said it did not matter. It did not matter. Walter said. He let those words hang in the cold air. Your mother planted a rose bush on that lot in 1978. She watered it. Every Sunday. She talked to it like it was a child. And you signed a permit to pour concrete over it because a man in a charcoal suit told you it did not matter. Marcus was crying. Quiet, broken sounds. The kind of crying a man does when he realizes the crack is not in the plaster. It is in the foundation. It is in him. Dad, please. I need a lawyer. I need money. My bank account has $1,100 in it. Cross has not paid me in 2 months. The salary, the office, the clients, all of it was a lie. I have nothing. Walter closed his eyes. The wind bit his face. His knuckles throbbed. He thought about Dorothy's hands in the dirt, pressing roots into Chicago clay. He thought about the $280,000 he had spent on Marcus's education. He thought about the $170,000 trust fund that no longer had Marcus's name on it. Marcus, I am your father. I will always be your father. But I am not your bank. You stood on a stage and chose your architect. You chose the man who taught you to build on sand. And now the sand is washing out, and you want the mason to fix it. Dad, please. Help does not look like what you think it looks like. Help is not a check. Help is not a phone call to a lawyer. Help is learning what a real foundation feels like. Then what do I do? Walter opened his eyes. He looked at his hands. The swollen knuckles. The mortar dust permanently embedded in the creases. The crooked index finger he had broken in '91 and never had properly set because he could not afford to miss a day of work. You come home, Marcus. You put on work boots and you stand next to me on a job site at 6 in the morning when it is 14 degrees and the concrete is fighting you. You learn what it means to build something real. That is the only help I have. The line was quiet for a long time. Then Marcus said, I will think about it. Do not think too long. Concrete does not wait. And neither does the FBI. He closed the phone. He sat on the porch for another hour, watching the streetlights hold their ground against the dark. Then he went inside, locked the door, and looked at Dorothy's photograph. He called Dot. He finally called. He paused, but he called the wrong number. He was looking for a banker. He got a bricklayer. Walter turned off the light and went to bed. Marcus did not come home the next day, or the day after, or the week after. Walter did not call again. He had said what he needed to say, and the rest was up to the boy. That is the thing about foundations. You can pour them, level them, cure them, but you cannot force someone to build on them. They have to choose to stand there themselves. 3 weeks passed. Thanksgiving came and went. Walter ate a turkey sandwich alone at the kitchen table and watched the Bears lose on a 12-inch television he had owned since 2004. Dorothy used to make a full spread. Turkey, gravy, mashed potatoes, cornbread stuffing with sage from the garden, and a sweet potato pie that could make a grown man cry. Walter tried making the pie once. 2 years after she died, he burned the crust and the filling tasted like wet cardboard. He never tried again. Some things belong to the person who made them, and no amount of effort can replicate what was built with love. December arrived like a fist. Chicago winters do not ease in. They hit. The temperature dropped to 9 degrees on the first Monday of the month, And by Wednesday, a storm system moved in from the northwest that the weatherman called a polar vortex. Walter called it Tuesday. In Chicago, every bad storm is just another Tuesday. He was in the basement organizing his tools when the knock came. Not the doorbell. A knock. 3 hits. Hard. Like someone trying to drive a nail with their bare hand. Walter climbed the stairs slowly, his left knee grinding with every step, and opened the front door. Marcus stood on the porch. Walter barely recognized him. His son had lost weight, maybe 15 pounds, and it showed in his face. The sharp jawline that used to look confident now looked hollow. His eyes were red-rimmed and glassy. He wore a thin wool overcoat that probably cost $800 when Cross bought it for him, but now hung off his shoulders like a curtain on a broken rod. No hat, no gloves. Snow was collecting on his hair and melting down his temples. He was holding a duffel bag in one hand and a manila folder in the other. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable, like mortar splitting in a freeze. Walter looked at his son for a long time. He looked at the thin coat and the dress shoes soaked through with slush. He looked at the duffel bag, small enough to carry a life that had been reduced to almost nothing. He stepped aside and held the door open. "Get inside before you freeze to death." Marcus walked in and stood in the hallway, dripping on the linoleum that Walter had laid in 2001. He did not sit down. He did not take off his coat. He just stood there, shaking, holding the duffel bag like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Walter closed the door and walked to the kitchen. He came back with a towel and a cup of black coffee. He handed both to Marcus without a word. Marcus took the towel and pressed it to his face. He held it there for a long time. When he pulled it away, his eyes were wet, and Walter could not tell if it was snow or tears. It did not matter. Both come from the same cold place. "Sit down," Walter said. Marcus sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he had done his homework as a boy. The same table where Dorothy had served oatmeal every morning and told him stories about her grandmother in Alabama who picked cotton until her fingers bled and still sang hymns on Sunday. The same table where Walter had signed away $170,000 with a hand that did not shake. Marcus set the manila folder on the table. "My lawyer sent this. The FBI is charging me as a cooperating witness. I gave them everything. Every email. Every permit. Every conversation I had with Cross about Meridian. They are not going to prosecute me. But my architecture license has been suspended pending a full review by the state board. It could be revoked permanently." Walter sat across from him. He did not touch the folder. He did not need to read it. He already knew what it said. Ray's investigator had told him 2 weeks ago that Marcus was cooperating. That was the one piece of good news in this whole mess. His son had enough sense left to stop lying before the lying buried him completely. "So you gave them Cross?" Walter said. "I gave them everything. Every document. They have his emails, his financial records, his offshore accounts in the Caymans. He was moving money through 4 shell companies. Dad, the 51st Street project alone had $2.3 million in fraudulent invoices. He billed for materials that were never delivered, labor that was never performed, inspections that never happened. The foundation on that site is not even up to code. It would have collapsed within 5 years." Walter felt something twist in his chest. Not surprise. He had known the foundation was bad the moment he saw it on television. A mason can spot a failed pour the way a doctor spots a broken bone, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that the foundation built on Dorothy's land would have crumbled and killed someone, that hit different. The building would have fallen. Walter said quietly, "Yes." The structural engineer said the load-bearing calculations were falsified. Cross signed off on numbers he knew were wrong. Walter looked at Dorothy's photograph on the shelf. Her face, frozen in 1985, smiling with a trowel in her hand. She had never touched a lie in her life. She could not even bluff at cards. And now her son had spent 2 years signing his name next to a man who falsified everything he touched. "Marcus," Walter said, "I need to tell you something about the trust fund." Marcus looked up. His red eyes sharpened. "The 170,000? Yes. Dad, I know I do not deserve it. But I need it. I need a lawyer for the license hearing. I need first and last month rent because my landlord is evicting me at the end of December. I need to survive until I figure out what comes next. Please, I am asking you as your son." Walter folded his hands on the table. The knuckles cracked softly, the way old wood pops in the cold. "The money is gone, Marcus." The words landed in the kitchen like a cinder block dropped on tile. Marcus blinked. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked like a man who had just watched the last wall of his house come down. "What do you mean, gone?" Walter did not flinch. He did not look away. "I will tell you where it went. But not tonight. Tonight you eat, you shower, and you sleep. Tomorrow morning, I will show you everything." Marcus stared at him. The storm outside threw snow against the kitchen window in gusts that sounded like gravel hitting glass. The radiator hissed. The clock ticked. Neither of them moved. 6 in the morning, Walter said. Concrete does not wait. Walter woke at 4:30. He did not need an alarm. His body had been waking at 4:30 for 50 years, same as the radiator kicked on at 4:15, and the kitchen faucet dripped every 6 seconds. Some things in this house ran on their own clock, and Walter was one of them. He made black coffee, 2 eggs, toast. He ate standing at the counter, looking out the window at the snow still falling in the dark. The storm had not quit. If anything, it had dug in deeper, the way Chicago storms do, like they are trying to prove something to the city, and the city keeps refusing to be impressed. Marcus came down the stairs at 5:15. He was wearing the same thin wool overcoat from last night. His dress shoes were still wet. His face had not decided whether to be angry or afraid, so it settled on both. Walter pointed at the kitchen table. "Sit." Marcus sat. Walter poured him black coffee. No sugar. No cream. Between them on the table was a large manila envelope. Thick, corners bent from months in the kitchen drawer. Walter had placed it there at 4:45, next to Dorothy's photograph. "You asked me about the trust fund last night," Walter said. $170,000. I set it up 11 years ago, the year your mother died. Money from selling the lot on 51st Street, and 40 years of saving 10% of every paycheck. It was supposed to be your foundation. Marcus stared at the envelope. "I transferred the money 4 months ago, the morning after your graduation. I signed the papers in Ray Kowalski's office before the ink on your diploma was dry." "Transferred it where?" Walter pushed the envelope across the table. "Open it." Marcus unwound the string clasp with trembling fingers. Walter watched his son's hands. Those hands had never mixed mortar or carried a hod of bricks up a scaffold, but they were still his son's hands, and Walter could see Dorothy in the way Marcus's thumb pressed the clasp. Careful, precise, the same way she used to press seeds into soil. Inside was a stack of papers, maybe 40 pages, held together with a binder clip. On top was a single sheet with a letterhead that read, "Dorothy Briggs Foundation. Established 2024. Chicago, Illinois." Marcus read it twice. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Keep reading," Walter said. "The foundation charter. Purpose. Full ride scholarships for trade school students in the Chicago metropolitan area, covering tuition, tools, certification exams, and a first-year living stipend. Eligible trades included bricklaying, plumbing, electrical work, welding, carpentry, and HVAC. Funding source: a one-time transfer of $170,000 from the Walter E. Briggs Family Trust. The third page was a list of 10 names. 10 scholarship recipients from community colleges and vocational programs across the South Side and West Side. A 19-year-old from Englewood whose mother worked 2 cleaning jobs. A 22-year-old veteran from back of the yards who lost 3 fingers in Afghanistan and wanted to become an electrician. A single mother from Pilsen studying to be a welder. A 17-year-old from Auburn Gresham who had been arrested twice for shoplifting but tested in the 98th percentile on a mechanical aptitude exam. 10 stories. 10 foundations waiting to be poured. Marcus looked up. His eyes were wet. His jaw clenched so tight, the muscles jumped beneath his skin. "You gave my money away," Marcus said. "To strangers. I gave it to workers. People who want to build things with their hands. People who will never stand on a stage and insult the ones who paid for their future. That was my money, Dad. It was my money, Marcus. Every dollar. I mixed it in with the mortar and the sweat and the dust that your mother breathed until it killed her. I saved it so you would have a foundation, but you do not want a foundation. You want a penthouse, and penthouses built on lies collapse." Marcus shoved the papers across the table. They fanned out like a broken hand of cards. Dorothy's photograph wobbled on the shelf but did not fall. "Those 10 people," Walter said quietly. "They will build houses, wire buildings, weld bridges, and 20 years from now, when someone asks who helped them, they will say the name Dorothy Briggs. Your mother's name. Not Cross. Not Meridian. Your mother." Marcus put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, but he did not make a sound. It was the kind of grief that has no words, because the words would crack the last wall holding him together. Walter let him sit. He did not reach across the table. He did not say it was going to be okay. Some cracks can be repaired, and some go all the way through. A mason knows the difference. But he also knew one thing most people forget. Even a cracked wall can hold weight if you rebuild it from the base. He walked to the hallway closet and came back with a pair of Red Wing work boots, size 11, steel toe, brand new, still in the box. He set them on the table in front of Marcus, right on top of the scattered scholarship papers. "These were your Christmas present. I bought them in October, before the arrest, before the phone call, before any of this. Because some part of me always knew you would end up back at this table." Marcus lifted his face. He looked at the boots. Brown leather. Yellow laces. Heavy soles built for concrete and mud. And 14-degree mornings. 6 o'clock, Walter said. "I will be in the truck." He washed his coffee cup, dried it, placed it upside down on the rack. Then he put on his canvas jacket and stepped out into the storm. Walter sat in the truck with the engine running and the heater blowing warm air that smelled like old dust and motor oil. The dashboard clock read 5:47. Snow was still falling, lighter now, the kind of snow that drifts sideways and settles on everything like a thin white sheet pulled over a sleeping city. He had his work gloves on the passenger seat and a thermos of black coffee wedged between his knees. The radio was off. Walter did not listen to music on job site mornings. He listened to the engine, and the wind, and his own breathing. And that was enough. At 5:58, the front door opened. Marcus stepped onto the porch, wearing the Red Wing boots. They were unlaced, and the leather was stiff, and the yellow laces dragged on the concrete like 2 small ropes looking for something to hold on to. He had on a pair of Walter's old canvas work pants, rolled twice at the cuffs, and a gray hoodie that Walter recognized as one he had left in the upstairs closet 6 years ago. The thin wool overcoat was gone. The dress shoes were gone. Marcus looked like a different person. Not better. Not worse. Just stripped down to something that had not been visible before. The way a wall looks different when you tear off the plaster and see the bare brick underneath. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door. He did not say good morning. He did not say anything. He just sat there with his hands in his lap, staring through the windshield at the falling snow. Walter put the truck in reverse and backed out of the driveway. The F-250 groaned the way it always groaned, 340,000 miles of groaning that sounded less like a complaint and more like a conversation between old friends who had been through too much to bother with small talk. They drove south on Ashland in silence. The streets were empty except for a salt truck grinding along 43rd and a woman in a puffy coat walking a pit bull that looked like it wanted to be anywhere else. Walter turned east on 55th, then south again on Halstead, and pulled into a gravel lot behind a half-finished community center in Englewood. This was the job. A new recreation room for a church called Greater Hope Baptist. Pastor Williams had hired Walter to lay the interior walls, 800 square feet of load-bearing brick, on a budget that was more prayer than money. Walter had given him a price that barely covered materials because Greater Hope had fed Dorothy during her last year when Walter was too exhausted to cook. He parked the truck and turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and total. No heater, no engine. Just wind and the soft ticking of cooling metal. "Listen to me," Walter said without looking at Marcus. "This is not punishment. I am not doing this to humiliate you. I am doing this because it is the only thing I know how to give you that is worth anything. A shill. A trade. Something that cannot be frozen by the FBI, or revoked by a licensing board, or stolen by a man in a charcoal suit." Marcus did not respond. Walter continued, "You will carry brick. You will mix mortar. You will hand me tools when I ask for them. And you will not complain about the cold, or the dust, or the weight. You will learn how a wall is built from the footing up, and if you pay attention, if you actually listen for once in your life, you will understand something that 4 years at Yale and 2 years with Nathaniel Cross never taught you." "What is that?" Marcus asked. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind rattling the truck windows. "That the only thing worth building is something that can stand on its own." Walter opened his door and stepped into the cold. The air hit his face like a slap. 9 degrees. He could feel it in his knuckles before his boots touched the gravel. Marcus followed. Slower. The new boots crunching on frozen stone, his breath coming out in white clouds that vanished as fast as they formed. The job site was bare. Concrete slab floor. Steel framing. Temporary plywood walls. A portable heater in the corner that ran on propane and faith. Walter's materials were stacked along the east wall. 12 pallets of red brick, 40 bags of Portland cement, a mixing trough, 3 trowels, a level, a mason's line, and a 5-gallon bucket of water that had a thin skin of ice on top. Walter handed Marcus a pair of leather work gloves. "Put these on. Grab that wheelbarrow, and bring me 4 bags of cement. Stack them next to the trough." Marcus hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he pulled on the gloves, walked to the pallets, and picked up the first bag. 94 pounds. Walter watched his son's knees buckle slightly under the weight, watched his back curve in a way that would hurt by noon, watched him carry the bag to the trough, and drop it with a grunt that echoed off the concrete walls. 3 more, Walter said. Marcus went back. 2nd bag. 3rd. 4th. By the 4th bag, his arms were shaking, and his breath was ragged, and there was a dark patch of sweat on the back of the gray hoodie, despite the 9-degree air. He stood next to the trough, hands on his knees, head down. Walter walked over and cut the first bag open with a utility knife. He poured the cement into the trough, added water from the bucket, breaking the ice with his fist first, and began mixing with a hoe. The sound of metal scraping against metal, and the wet grinding of cement and sand filled the empty room. "Come here," Walter said. "Watch my hands." Marcus straightened up and stood beside his father. Walter scooped a trowel full of mortar and held it up, gray and wet and heavy, clinging to the steel blade like it did not want to let go. "This is mortar," Walter said. "It holds everything together. Without it, brick is just a pile of red rectangles. With it, brick becomes a wall. A wall becomes a room. A room becomes a place where someone's kid does homework, or someone's grandmother says grace before dinner. This is what I have done for 50 years. I hold things together. He spread the mortar along the top of the first course of brick that had been laid the week before. Smooth. Even. A quarter-inch thick. No more, no less. Then he picked up a brick, buttered the end with a flick of his wrist that looked effortless, but had taken him 3 years to master, and pressed it into place. He tapped it twice with the handle of the trowel, checked the level, and nodded. "Your turn," he said, and handed Marcus the trowel. Marcus took it. The handle was wooden, worn smooth by decades of Walter's grip. The steel blade nicked and scratched, but still true. Marcus held it the way a man holds something he does not understand yet but knows is important. He scooped the mortar. Too much. It dripped off the sides and landed on his boot. He spread it along the brick. Too thick. Uneven. A ridge on the left side and a valley on the right. Walter did not correct him. He just watched. Because the first course is always ugly. The first wall is always crooked. The first day is always the hardest. And the only way to learn is to lay the brick wrong and feel it in your hands and try again. Marcus pressed the brick into place. It sat crooked, tilted slightly to the left, the mortar squeezing out the sides like toothpaste from a tube. He looked at Walter. Walter looked at the brick. Then he looked at his son. "It is not straight," Walter said. "Pull it out. Scrape the mortar. Try again." Marcus pulled it out. Scraped the mortar. Tried again. It was still crooked, but less crooked than before. Marcus worked for 2 weeks without complaint. Walter had expected resistance. He had expected the boy to quit after 3 days. Maybe 4. To say this was beneath him. To walk off the site and call a cab back to whatever was left of his old life. But Marcus did not quit. He showed up at 5:58 every morning. Boots laced now, gloves on, standing by the truck like a man waiting for a bus he was not sure would take him where he needed to go. The first week was ugly. Marcus could not mix mortar to the right consistency. Too wet, and it slid off the trowel like soup. Too dry, and it crumbled before he could spread it. Walter showed him once, twice, 5 times, 10 times. He did not yell. He did not lecture. He just mixed, spread, laid, tapped, checked, and said, again. Marcus's hands blistered on the 3rd day. 2 raw patches on each palm that bled through the leather gloves and left pink stains on the mortar. Walter handed him electrical tape and said, "Wrap them. Keep going." By the end of the first week, Marcus could carry 6 bags of cement without stopping. His mortar was still uneven, but it held. His bricks were still slightly off level, but the gap was closing. Walter noticed that Marcus had stopped checking his phone during breaks. The first 2 days he had pulled it out every 15 minutes, scrolling through nothing, a reflex from a life that no longer existed. By Friday, he left it in the truck. Walter did not mention it. Some changes do not need words. They just need to be seen. The second week was better. Marcus learned to read the mortar by feel. The way it clung to the trowel. The weight of it. The slight resistance when it was ready. He learned to butter the end of a brick. With 1 motion instead of 3. He learned that a mason's line is not a suggestion but a law, and that every brick that sits above the line or below it is a lie that the next course will have to carry. Walter taught him these things the way his own father had taught him, not with speeches or explanations, but with repetition and silence and the occasional nod that meant more than a paragraph. On the last day of the 2nd week, a Friday afternoon, they finished the east wall of the recreation room. 800 bricks, 47 courses, a wall that ran straight and true from the footing to the header, plumb on every check, level on every course. Marcus stood back and looked at it. Walter stood next to him. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. "That wall is going to be there when we are both dead," Walter said. "Kids are going to play basketball on the other side of it. Old women are going to sit in folding chairs and fan themselves during summer Bible study, and none of them will know your name or mine." But the wall will hold. That is what matters. Marcus nodded. His face was different now. Not the polished confidence of the Yale valedictorian. Not the hollow desperation of the man who showed up in a snowstorm with a duffel bag. Something in between. Something still forming. Like wet mortar that had not set yet but was starting to hold its shape. Walter walked to the truck and opened the cab behind the seats. He reached into a canvas bag and pulled out something wrapped in an old chamois cloth, the tan kind that mechanics use, soft from years of oil and handling. He carried it back to where Marcus was standing and held it out. "Open it," Walter said. Marcus unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a trowel. Not new, not shiny. The blade was dark with age, the edges worn smooth from decades of use, the steel still straight and true despite the years. The wooden handle was cracked in one place near the ferrule, repaired with a thin wrap of copper wire that had turned green with time. On the back of the handle, carved in small block letters, were two sets of initials, E, B, and WB. Edward Briggs and Walter Briggs. Father and son. "That trowel belonged to my father," Walter said. "Edward Briggs. He brought it from Mississippi in 1951 when he moved to Chicago to find work. He was 19 years old with $80 in his pocket and a trowel in his bag. He laid his first brick on a building in Bronzeville that same week. He did not have a license. He did not have a degree. He had a tool in two hands and the willingness to show up when it was cold and dark and nobody was watching." Walter paused. The wind moved through the open framing of the building, carrying the smell of fresh mortar and frozen earth. "He gave me that trowel when I was 22. Same age you are now," he said. "A trowel does not care about your name or your degree or how much money you have. It only cares if your hand is steady and your line is true. I have carried it for 50 years. I used it on every wall I have ever built. Every house. Every porch. Every foundation." Marcus held the trowel in both hands. He turned it over slowly, running his thumb along the copper wire repair, touching the carved initials with his fingertip the way a man touches something sacred that he is not sure he deserves to hold. "I am adding your initials," Walter said. "M.B. Right below mine. But not today. You earn that. You earn it by showing up tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. You earn it by building things that stand. Not things that impress, things that stand." Marcus looked at his father. His eyes were red, but he was not crying. He was past crying. He had arrived at something deeper than tears. A place where a man stands in the rubble of everything he thought he was, and sees, for the first time, the outline of what he could become. "I will be here," Marcus said. "Tomorrow. 6 o'clock. Walter took the trowel back gently and wrapped it in the chamois cloth. He placed it in Marcus's hands. "Keep it tonight. Feel the weight of it. That is 3 generations in your hands, son. Do not drop it." They loaded the tools in silence. Walter drove them home through streets turning gold in the winter sunset. Marcus sat in the passenger seat with the wrapped trowel on his lap, both hands resting on it. The way Dorothy used to hold her Bible on the drive home from church. Walter noticed but said nothing. Some things you do not point out. You just let them grow. Like a rose bush planted in hard clay by a woman who believed that anything could bloom if you gave it enough patience and enough water and enough love. They pulled into the driveway at 4:30. Walter turned off the engine. The truck ticked and settled. Marcus opened his door, then stopped. "Dad, yeah, thank you. For the wall. For the boots. For this." He held up the trowel. "For not giving up on me." Walter looked at his son. He saw Dorothy's careful hands. He saw Edward's stubborn jaw. He saw 23 years of mistakes and love and silence and sacrifice, pressed together like mortar between bricks. "I am a mason, Marcus. I do not give up on foundations. I fix them." Marcus went inside. Walter sat in the truck for another minute, listening to the engine cool, and the wind pushed through the bare branches of the elm tree he had planted the year Marcus was born. Then he whispered to nobody and everybody, "He is holding your trowel, Dot. He is holding it right." January was the cruelest month. Not because of the cold, although Chicago gave them everything it had. 14 below on the worst morning. Wind chill that turned exposed skin white in 4 minutes. Not because of the work, although the work was relentless. 6 days a week. 6 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. Brick and mortar and frozen sand and fingers that stopped feeling human by noon. January was cruel because it was the month Marcus learned what it meant to be ordinary. At Yale he had been exceptional. Valedictorian. The young architect with the sharp suits and the sharper tongue who could design a building on a napkin and make a room full of professors applaud. On Walter's job sites he was nobody. He was the new guy, the one who carried bags and mixed mortar and swept the floor at the end of the day while the real masons talked about the bears and complained about their knees. Nobody asked about his degree. Nobody cared about his GPA. The only question anyone asked was whether his mortar was the right consistency and whether his courses were level. Most days the answer was not yet. Tony Medina was the first to test him. Tony had worked with Walter for 11 years, a stocky Mexican-American from Pilsen with forearms like bridge cables and a laugh that could shake dust off the ceiling. He did not trust Marcus. Walter could see it in the way Tony handed him tools. Just a little too hard. Dropped bags of cement just a little too close to his feet. Gave instructions just a little too fast for a beginner to follow. On the 3rd day of January, Tony told Marcus to carry a hod of bricks up a temporary scaffold to the 2nd level of a duplex they were restoring in back of the yards. A hod is a V-shaped metal trough on a wooden handle designed to carry 12 bricks at a time. Loaded, it weighs about 60 pounds. Carrying it up a ladder requires balance, grip strength, and the kind of core stability that no gym membership can replicate. Marcus made it halfway up the ladder before the hod tilted. 6 bricks slid out and fell 12 feet to the concrete below, shattering into red fragments that scattered across the floor like broken teeth. Tony looked at Walter. Walter looked at Marcus, who stood on the ladder, gripping the half-empty hod, his face red with cold and shame. "Pick them up," Walter said. "Reload. Go again." Marcus climbed down. He picked up every fragment by hand, dropped them in the waste bucket, reloaded the hod with fresh bricks, and went up the ladder again. This time, he made it. His arms were shaking when he set the hod down on the scaffold platform, but he made it. Tony said nothing. But Walter noticed that from that day forward, Tony handed Marcus tools at normal speed. By the end of January, Marcus could lay 40 bricks an hour. Not fast by professional standards. Walter could lay 120 on a good day, and Tony could match him brick for brick. But 40 was respectable for a man who had never touched a trowel 5 weeks ago. His mortar joints were tighter. His courses were straighter. His hands had developed a new geography. Calluses on the palms, rough skin on the fingertips, a permanent half-moon of gray mortar under every nail that no amount of scrubbing could remove. He stopped looking at his hands with disgust. Walter noticed that too. February was the month of walls. Walter moved Marcus from carrying and mixing to actual bricklaying on live projects. A retaining wall for a parking lot on Western Avenue. An interior partition for a restaurant on Archer, a chimney rebuild for an old Polish woman on 32nd Street who fed them pierogi and called Marcus the skinny one. Marcus made mistakes. A wall on Western had to be partially torn down and relayed because he had not checked his level every 4th course the way Walter taught him. The restaurant partition had a visible bow in the center that Walter fixed by pulling 3 courses and resetting them with a tighter line. But the chimney was good. Clean lines, tight joints, proper flashing at the roofline. The old woman touched the finished brickwork with her hand and said something in Polish that Walter did not understand. But Marcus later told him meant warm hands built this. Walter did not know if that was the actual translation. He did not care. The chimney was plumb, and the old woman was smiling, and his son had built something that would keep someone warm through the next 20 winters. That was enough. March was the month Marcus stopped being the new guy. It did not happen on a specific day. It happened in small moments that accumulated like courses of brick, each one barely noticeable on its own but together forming something solid. Tony started calling him Junior instead of Hey You. Earl Patterson, a 60-year-old electrician who worked the same sites, asked Marcus to hold a junction box steady while he wired a panel and did not double-check Marcus's grip the way he used to. Miguel, a plumber from Little Village, invited Marcus to eat lunch with the crew instead of sitting alone by the truck. Walter watched all of this from across job sites and through doorways and over the tops of half-finished walls. He did not comment. He did not praise. A mason does not praise a wall while it is still being built. You wait until it is finished, until the mortar has cured and the courses have settled and the whole structure has proven that it can hold weight. Then you step back and nod. That is enough. On the last day of March, Walter and Marcus drove home in the truck through a cold rain that could not decide if it wanted to be snow. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm that sounded like a slow heartbeat. Marcus sat in the passenger seat with his work gloves in his lap, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "Dad," he said. "Yeah, I laid 214 bricks today." Walter kept his eyes on the road. 214. Not a record. Not exceptional. Just a solid day's work. From a man who was learning to build things one brick at a time. "I know," Walter said. "I counted." Marcus looked at him. Walter did not look back. But in the reflection of the rain-streaked window, Marcus could see something on his father's face that he had not seen since the morning before the graduation ceremony, when Walter had straightened his charcoal tie in the hotel mirror and smiled at his own reflection like a man who still believed the day would go the way he hoped. It was pride. Quiet. Earned. Real. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. The good kind. April arrived with rain. Not the soft kind that coaxes flowers out of the ground, but the heavy, relentless kind that turns job sites into swamps and makes every brick weigh twice as much. Walter had worked through 50 Chicago springs, and not one of them had been gentle. Spring in this city is not a season. It is a negotiation between winter and summer, and both sides fight dirty. They were working on a new project. A single-story house for a veteran named Clarence Webb, on a lot in Roseland that had been empty for 9 years. Clarence was 78. A Korean War veteran who had lost his left leg below the knee at Chosin Reservoir and spent the next 50 years walking on a prosthetic. He adjusted himself with a wrench and electrical tape. The Dorothy Briggs Foundation had awarded him a housing grant, one of the first grants beyond the trade scholarships funded by a local contractor who had heard about the foundation through Pastor Williams at Greater Hope. When Marcus saw the name Dorothy Briggs Foundation on the paperwork, he went quiet for a full minute. He looked at Walter across the job site. Walter looked back. Neither of them said anything. The money had become a house for a man who had given his leg for his country, and that was a sentence that did not need a response. They poured the foundation in the first week of April. Walter, Marcus, Tony, and 2 laborers worked 3 days straight to get the footings and slab down before the rain came. They made it with 6 hours to spare. On the 3rd day of rain, Walter got a call at 4 in the morning. "Tony. Boss. The drainage trench on the east side collapsed. Water is pooling against the foundation. 12 more hours and it undermines the footing. We lose everything." Walter was dressed and in the truck in 11 minutes. Marcus was already waiting on the porch. Walter had not called him. The boy had heard the phone through the wall, heard Walter's boots on the stairs, and figured out the rest on his own. He was standing in the dark wearing his Red Wings and a rain jacket. Walter had bought him at a surplus store on Pulaski for $14. His work gloves were already on. The lot in Roseland looked like a lake. Brown water covered the ground ankle deep, pressing against the east wall of the freshly poured slab. Tony was already there with a gas-powered pump, but the collapsed trench funneled everything directly toward the footing. Walter assessed the situation in 30 seconds. We dig a bypass trench, 40 feet long, 18 inches deep, angled southeast toward the storm drain on 112th. Tony, keep that pump running. Marcus, grab the shovels. Marcus stepped into the water. It came up over the tops of his Red Wings immediately, filling them with cold brown mud that felt like liquid concrete poured into your socks. He did not hesitate. He drove the shovel into the ground and started digging. They dug for 3 hours. Walter on one end, Marcus on the other, Tony running the pump between them. The rain did not stop. Walter's back screamed after the first hour, his knees after the second. By the third hour, he was working on pure stubbornness, but it was Marcus who saved the foundation. At the halfway point, they hit a buried concrete slab, probably an old sidewalk, blocking the drainage path. Walter tried to break it with a pickaxe. His arms did not have the strength. Tony tried. The angle was wrong in the deep water. Marcus took the pickaxe without asking. He planted his feet in the mud, adjusted his grip the way Walter had taught him, and swung. The first hit cracked it. The second opened a gap. The third shattered it into pieces that Marcus dragged out with his bare hands, cutting his right palm on a jagged edge that bled red into the brown water. He did not stop. He wrapped his hand in his shirt, picked up the shovel, and kept digging. The bypass trench was finished by 7:30. Water redirected southeast, flowing away from the foundation in a steady stream toward the storm drain. Tony cut the pump. They stood in the rain, covered in mud from their chests down, watching the water level drop inch by inch. The slab was clean, undamaged. The footing was intact. 3 days of work, saved by 3 hours of digging in the dark. Marcus was leaning on his shovel, rain streaming down his face, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his hand. He was looking at the foundation, not the way an architect looks at buildings, calculating angles and cost per square foot. He was looking at it the way a builder looks at something he almost lost and fought to keep. That is Clarence's house, Marcus said quietly. His walls are going to stand on that. Yes, they are, Walter said. Marcus looked down at his muddy hands, the cut palm, the calluses that had not existed 4 months ago. Then he looked at Walter's hands. The same hands, older, more broken, but the same. Mom would have been out here, Marcus said. In the mud. With a shovel. Walter felt something crack inside his chest. Not a bad kind. The kind of crack that happens when a wall holding too much weight finally shifts and settles into a position it can sustain. A release. A realignment. Yes, she would have. And she would have finished before both of us. Marcus laughed. The first time Walter had heard his son laugh since before the graduation. Short, tired, rough, but real. Real the way brick is real. Real the way a foundation poured in the rain and saved by 2 men with shovels is real. Walter put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. The first time he had touched his son in 4 months, his grip was firm but not hard. The grip of a man who knows how much pressure a wall can take. Let us go home, son. I will make coffee. 1 year after the graduation at Yale, Walter drove his F-250 to the lot in Roseland for the last time. The truck had 347,000 miles on it now. 7,000 more than the day he had driven to Connecticut to watch his son become a valedictorian. The engine knocked louder. The passenger seat had a new tear in the vinyl from where Marcus had dropped a masonry hammer in February. The bed was permanently dusted with dried mortar. It was the most beautiful truck Walter had ever owned, because it had carried him and his son to work every morning for 12 months without complaint. The house was finished. Clarence Webb's house. A single story. 3-bedroom brick home with a covered porch, a wheelchair ramp on the east side, and a chimney that Marcus had laid himself over 3 days in May while Walter watched from the ground and did not correct him once. Because there was nothing to correct. The courses were level. The joints were tight. It was the chimney of a man who had learned his trade by getting it wrong 100 times until his hands remembered how to get it right. The neighborhood had turned out. Maybe 30 people on the sidewalk. Pastor Williams in a white shirt and suspenders. Tony Medina with his wife, and 2 daughters in Greater Hope Baptist t-shirts. Earl Patterson leaning against his van, nodding at the house the way electricians nod at things they have wired and know will work. Miguel, with a cooler of tamales his mother had made at 4 in the morning. Clarence Webb sat on his new porch in a wheelchair, wearing a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap and a flannel shirt buttoned to the top. His prosthetic leg was propped on a small stool Marcus had built from leftover lumber. Clarence was smiling. Not the polite smile of a man receiving charity. The deep smile of a man sitting on his own porch for the first time in 9 years, knowing the walls behind him were solid. Walter walked up the ramp and shook Clarence's hand. "Mr. Briggs," Clarence said, "I have lived in 11 places since Korea. Barracks. Apartments. A shelter on Roosevelt for 2 winters. This is the first one that feels like mine." "It is yours," Walter said. "Every brick." Marcus was standing by the front door. Red Wing boots broken in. Leather dark with months of mortar and mud. Canvas work pants, patched on the left knee. His hands at his sides, calloused and scarred. The cut from the April trench, now a thin white line that would never disappear. He looked like a builder. Not an architect. A builder. Walter reached into the truck bed and pulled out a wooden sign. He had made it himself, cutting the board from reclaimed oak that came from a demolished schoolhouse on 49th Street. Routing the letters with a hand tool that had belonged to his father. No paint, no lacquer. Just bare oak, with letters carved deep enough to last. It read, "Built by Briggs and Briggs. For Clarence. For Dorothy." Marcus read the words twice. His jaw tightened the way it did when he was trying not to let something out. "Help me hang it," Walter said. Marcus took the drill. He held the sign flat against the brick, while Walter marked the holes. Then Marcus drilled 2 anchors into the mortar joints he had laid himself and drove 2 stainless steel screws through the oak and into the wall. The sign hung straight and true, the letters catching the morning light. Pastor Williams said a prayer. Clarence bowed his head. Earl wiped his eyes and pretended it was allergies. Miguel passed out tamales. The neighborhood looked at a house that had not existed 8 months ago, and now stood solid and full of a quiet dignity that no glass tower could replicate. After the prayer, after the tamales, after Clarence wheeled himself inside and touched every wall with his palm like he was making sure it was real, Walter walked to the east side of the house, the side that faced the morning sun. He knelt in the dirt beside the foundation and dug a small hole with his hands. The same hands that had laid 200,000 bricks in 50 years. The same hands that had held Dorothy's face the night she died. The same hands that had signed away $170,000 without trembling. He pulled out a small plastic pot with a single rose cutting inside. Red. Dorothy's variety. He had taken the cutting from a bush at Greater Hope Baptist that had been propagated from a plant Dorothy had given Pastor Williams's wife in 2003. Which itself had grown from the original bush she planted on the 51st Street lot in 1978. 3 generations of the same rose. Walter pressed the roots into the Chicago clay and covered them with soil. Marcus was standing behind him. Walter did not know how long he had been there. His son was looking at the rose cutting, at the dark soil, at his father's dirty hands. "Is that Mom's?" Marcus asked. "Yes. 3 generations back. Same plant." Marcus knelt beside his father. He scooped soil around the base with his bare hands, pressing it firm the way Walter had shown him, the way Dorothy had shown Walter, the way the earth teaches everyone willing to get on their knees and listen. "For Mom," Marcus said. "For Mom," Walter said. They stood up together. Father and son. 2 builders. 2 Briggs. Standing beside a house they had built with their hands on a warm June morning, with a rose growing at the foundation that carried the DNA of a woman who believed anything could bloom if you gave it enough patience and enough water and enough love. Walter looked at the sign on the wall. He looked at his son's scarred hands. He looked at the rose cutting, small and stubborn, leaning toward the sun. Then he looked at Dorothy's sky and said, "We built him a future, Dot. It is not the one we planned, but it is the one that will stand."